because it really is, solo man on his own. Even the way it's shot, and the infamous scene where, he goes out onto the main street, that sort of set.
Few films in Hollywood history carry the same kind of haunting weight as High Noon. Released in 1952, it looked at first like just another black and white Western, a simple story about a marshal, a town, and a showdown at noon. But behind its dust, shadows, and silence hides something far stranger. This was not just a Western, it was a mirror of its time, a coded protest, a film stitched together with accidents, improvisations, political battles, and personal pain. The clocks tick, the train approaches, the townspeople close their doors. But what if I told you that much of what you thought you knew about High Noon isn't what it seems? That the story you see on screen of betrayal, fear, and courage was also unfolding behind the camera, with the cast and crew living through betrayals of their own? In this video, we're uncovering 20 weird facts about High Noon that you probably never knew. From Gary Cooper's hidden suffering, to John Wayne's furious rejection, to the train accident that nearly ended in disaster. From Grace Kelly's casting scandal, to the theme song that hijacked the entire movie, to the silent role that launched a Western legend. These aren't just bits of trivia. They're secrets that reveal how a low-budget black and white Western became one of the most powerful and controversial films ever made. So grab your watch, listen for the whistle of the noon train, and walk with us down the dusty streets of Hadleyville. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at High Noon the same way again. The real-time illusion that wasn't so real. When people first describe High Noon, they usually say, it's told in real time. And that's true, almost. But here's the weird part. The story doesn't actually line up perfectly with the 84 minutes of film. In reality, the events in Hadleyville stretch to about 100 minutes. Fred Zinnemann and editor Elmo Williams didn't want you to notice. To keep up the relentless pace, they actually cheated with the clocks. If you look closely, certain clocks tick forward faster than they should, compressing minutes. The effect is subtle but deliberate, a manipulation of time that adds to the viewer's anxiety. Imagine watching this in 1952. The audience thinks they're seeing a story unfold in real time, when in fact the film is bending reality, making every tick of the clock heavier than the last. It's a cinematic sleight of hand. And here's the kicker. Gary Cooper himself, exhausted and struggling with ulcers, felt that distortion in real life. He said later that the filming felt like the longest short movie of his career. The irony? A film about time running out actually gave its own star the sensation of time dragging endlessly on. The political storm that nearly ruined the movie.
On his own. Even the way it's shot, and the infamous scene where, he goes.
To understand High Noon, you need to know it was born in a political firestorm. Screenwriter Carl Foreman was writing while under the shadow of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was accused of communist sympathies and pressured to name names. Foreman refused. That's where the weird overlap with the story comes in. Will Kane is abandoned by his town when he needs them most, just as Foreman's Hollywood peers abandoned him during the blacklist. The film became, intentionally or not, a mirror of its creator's ordeal.
It's better for you and it's better for us.
Producer Stanley Kramer panicked. He tried to have Foreman removed from the project, but Gary Cooper, who was politically conservative, shocked everyone. He defended Foreman's right to write the script. Cooper later said, "This is the best script I've ever read." The cost of that loyalty? Foreman was exiled from Hollywood. He left for England, never to return at the same level. Yet the irony is delicious. His blacklisted film went on to win 4 Oscars. So next time you watch Kane walk down that empty street, remember that wasn't just acting. It was Foreman writing himself into the role of a man standing alone while the world turned its back. Gary Cooper's sacrifice and hidden pain.
Feel actorish. The Western picture tells stories of the pioneer period. The pioneers.
Gary Cooper was already a legend by 1952, but High Noon came at a strange point in his life. He was 51 years old, plagued by health issues, ulcers, hip pain, and lingering injuries from earlier stunts. On top of that, He was emotionally worn out from the collapse of his affair with actress Patricia Neal. Here's the weird fact. Cooper cut his usual fee in half just to take the role. He believed in the script so deeply that he was willing to sacrifice financially. That decision shocked Hollywood insiders, because Cooper was one of the most expensive stars at the time, and yet his struggles became the film's secret weapon. Look closely at his face during those tense walks through Hadleyville. The hollow cheeks, the stiff movements, the haunted eyes, none of it is just performance. That was the real Gary Cooper, worn down by life, bleeding into the character of Will Kane. In later interviews, Fred Zinnemann admitted he barely had to direct Cooper in certain scenes. The pain was already there, he said. All Gary had to do was let the camera see it. Strangely enough, the very things that seemed like weaknesses, age, weariness, brokenness, turned into the elements that made Kane one of cinema's most unforgettable heroes. John Wayne's refusal and strange Oscar twist.
A whole city of people that have come across the plains and suffered all kinds of hardship.
When the script for High Noon first circulated, it landed on the desk of John Wayne. The studio thought he was the natural choice, Hollywood's ultimate Western hero, tall, fearless, larger than life. But Wayne didn't just say no, he rejected it with venom. Wayne reportedly called the script the most un-American thing I've ever seen in my life. Why? Because it showed a town unwilling to stand with its lawman, leaving him to fight alone. For Wayne, Westerns were supposed to celebrate rugged communities, not expose their cowardice. And here's the bizarre twist of fate. When Gary Cooper won the Academy Award for Best Actor for High Noon, he wasn't even in America to accept it. Guess who walked up to the podium on his behalf? John Wayne. The same man who had mocked the movie was now handing over the golden statue. Even stranger, Wayne used that moment to lobby Hollywood for a new kind of Western, one that rejected the so-called cowardice of High Noon. That campaign directly birthed Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo 7 years later, a film Wayne admitted was made as a counter-argument. So in the end, Wayne shaped the legacy of High Noon, not by starring in it, but by hating it. Grace Kelly's controversial casting.
One sees things differently, certainly.
When audiences first saw Grace Kelly in High Noon, many were stunned. She was breathtaking, yes, but she was also barely 21 years old, playing the Quaker bride of a man more than twice her age. Gary Cooper was 50. That age gap wasn't just an on-screen oddity. Behind the scenes, critics wondered if audiences would buy the marriage. Even Grace Kelly herself felt miscast. In a later interview, she confessed that her lack of experience left her insecure. She had only just come from stage work in New York when producer Stanley Kramer plucked her out and dropped her into Hollywood. The controversy grew sharper because whispers circled around Cooper and Kelly's chemistry. Hollywood gossip columns speculated about a possible off-screen affair. Most historians now say those rumors were exaggerated, but the whispers only added fuel to the already uneasy dynamic. Yet here's the irony. Kelly's awkwardness and youthful inexperience actually played into the story. Amy Kane is naive, innocent, and torn between faith and love. Her hesitancy on screen mirrors Kelly's hesitancy in real life, giving the character a strange authenticity. Within 2 years, Kelly would become one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. But in 1952, she was the miscast bride who somehow turned her supposed weakness into cinematic strength. The silent role that launched Lee Van Cleef.
His eyes are such that he got the term angel eyes referred to him. And he can currently be seen playing the good guy, believe it or not.
There's a face in High Noon that Western fans never forget. Sharp cheekbones, hawk-like eyes, a menace that doesn't need words. That face belonged to Lee Van Cleef, and High Noon was his very first film role. But here's the weird part. Van Cleef was originally offered the much larger role of Harvey Pell, the deputy who quits on Kane. The studio thought he was too rough-looking, too menacing, and demanded that he get nose surgery to soften his face for audiences. Van Cleef flat out refused. His nose was part of his identity, his menace, his uniqueness. As punishment, the role of Harvey Pell was handed to Lloyd Bridges. Van Cleef was demoted to Colby, a silent gunman with no lines, and yet that decision changed everything. Van Cleef's silent glare became unforgettable. The irony is delicious. His refusal to change his face turned him into one of the most iconic villainous presences in Western cinema. Later, Sergio Leone would cast him in for a few dollars more and the good, the bad, and the ugly, cementing him as a legend. So, the weird fact stands. The role he almost lost because of his nose turned into the role that launched his career. Silence spoke louder than dialogue. The train scene accident that almost went wrong. One of the most haunting shots in High Noon is the train's arrival. Black smoke billowing, the iron engine screeching into Hadleyville. It signals the return of Frank Miller and the doom looming over Will Kane. But here's the strange reality. That iconic shot was almost a disaster behind the camera. Director Fred Zinnemann and his crew didn't realize that the brakes on the train were partially failing during filming. As the locomotive barreled forward, the smoke pouring from its stack wasn't just cinematic atmosphere, it was a warning sign of mechanical strain. The camera crew had positioned themselves dangerously close to the tracks to capture the dramatic head-on perspective. When the tripod got caught in the ties, the train nearly clipped the camera. The crew scrambled at the last second, and while the tripod was damaged, the precious film stock survived. That footage made it into the final cut, adding to the raw, dangerous energy of the scene. What we watched as a carefully staged drama was, in truth, seconds away from becoming a fatal accident. Zinnemann later admitted that the fear you feel in that shot isn't just cinematic tension. It was very real. The crew staring down a runaway machine, just like Kane staring down fate. Black and white. By desperation, not style. When you picture High Noon, the harsh black and white imagery seems deliberate, a visual metaphor for moral choices, good versus evil. But here's the weird truth. The decision wasn't purely artistic. It was desperation. Producer Stanley Kramer originally wanted to shoot in color. A few test reels were made, showing the town in warm earth tones, the sky stretching wide in western blue. But director Fred Zinnemann hated it. The dusty streets looked too romantic, too soft. Worse, the budget simply couldn't support the expensive processing color required in 1952, so they pivoted. Black and white film was cheaper, faster to develop, and more forgiving on the rushed 32-day shooting schedule. What began as a financial compromise turned into cinematic poetry. The monochrome palette stripped away romance and turned Hadleyville into a stage of moral clarity or moral failure. In later interviews, Zinnemann admitted that shooting in black and white gave the movie a documentary realism he hadn't anticipated. Shadows fell harder, sweat looked harsher, and every tick of the clock seemed bleaker. In other words, what critics hailed as genius cinematography was really born from budget cuts and panic, a compromise that created one of the most iconic looks in Western history. The theme song that took over.
Then to craftsman and finally to master over a period of many years in the studios, and that artistry was truly rare.
The few films are defined by a single song the way High Noon is. The Ballad of High Noon, also known as Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darlin', doesn't just open the movie, it haunts it from start to finish. Composer Dmitri Tiomkin and lyricist Ned Washington originally meant it as a simple framing device, sung by country star Tex Ritter. But producer Stanley Kramer loved it so much that he insisted on weaving its melody throughout the score. The result? Audiences heard the ballad over and over again, almost obsessively. Critics at the time were divided. Some loved the innovation of a theme song becoming the film's backbone. Others thought it was heavy-handed, drowning out moments when Gary Cooper's silent acting could have spoken louder. Even Zinnemann admitted years later that the song might have been overused. Here's the fascinating twist. That so-called overuse made history. The song won the Academy Award for Best Original Song and became a hit single on its own. Even decades later, it remains one of the most recognizable Western ballads ever recorded. So what was intended as a single bookend turned into the heartbeat of the entire movie. Every note pressing the question, will Kane be forsaken or will he stand alone? The cut role of Roberta Haynes. Not every character in High Noon made it to the final cut. One of the strangest casualties was actress Roberta Haynes, who filmed scenes as a young townswoman with a small but telling subplot. Haynes was meant to appear during Kane's desperate search for help, offering a moment that revealed the ordinary townspeople's fear on a more personal level. She shot her lines, rehearsed with Gary Cooper, and appeared in early test reels. Yet when editor Elmo Williams and producer Stanley Kramer pieced the story together, her part was slashed out completely. Why? Pacing. The movie was designed to build dread with clockwork precision. Every second had to push Kane closer to Noon. Any detour, even a poignant one, risked breaking the tension. Haynes later said in interviews that she was devastated to be cut from what became a classic. The irony? Her career never fully took off, while High Noon soared to immortality. Today, only hardcore film historians even remember her lost role. But that absence adds to the weird history of the movie. A performance that was once part of Kane's journey now only exists in production notes and fading memories. A town that abandoned its sheriff on screen also abandoned a young actress off-screen. Editing battles behind the Oscar win. When High Noon won the Academy Award for Best Editing, two names appeared on the Oscar, Elmo Williams and Harry W. Gerstad. But here's the strange part. One of those names didn't really belong. Williams, a rising editor at the time, handled nearly all the crucial cutting. The crossfades between clocks, Kane's lonely walk through Hadleyville, the desperate townsfolk shutting their doors. His use of parallel editing turned minutes of silence into unbearable suspense. Every tick of a clock was punctuated by a cut, forcing the audience to march toward Noon in lockstep with Kane. Yet when it came time to submit for the Oscars, studio politics intervened. Harry W. Gerstad, head of the editing department, had his name added as co-winner, even though his role was minimal. Williams later admitted he felt cheated, but Hollywood hierarchies demanded Gerstad's inclusion. What's fascinating is that Williams's work wasn't just technical brilliance, it was psychological warfare. He used silence as rhythm, clocks as weapons, and the empty streets as visual pauses. Without those editing choices, High Noon wouldn't be the tense masterpiece it became. So while two names appear on that golden statue, cinephiles know the truth. It was Williams who carved time into a knife's edge. The clock trick that messed with time.
And on his way to exact revenge. Instead of running, the marshal chooses to wait for...
The clock is almost a character in High Noon. It hangs in the saloon, in the church, in the station, looming, ticking, demanding. But here's the odd trick. Those clocks don't actually keep time. Fred Zinnemann and Elmo Williams deliberately rigged them. If the movie had stuck to exact real time, it would have run long, breaking the 84-minute runtime. So, in several key moments, the hands move faster than reality. Take the church scene. While Kane argues with the congregation, the clock in the background ticks ahead more than it should. Later, as Kane paces alone, one clock skips nearly 2 minutes in what looks like 30 seconds of screen time. The result? The audience feels suffocated, as though time itself is betraying the marshal. It's a subtle illusion, but it works. Critics in 1952 praised the relentless realism of the countdown without realizing they'd been manipulated. What feels like a documentary rhythm is actually sleight of hand, a conjurer's trick in plain sight. The genius lies in psychology. You don't just watch time pass in High Noon, you feel it pressing on your chest, and you never notice that the filmmakers cheated to make it happen. The Quaker bride who broke her own faith. Amy Kane is not your typical Western bride. A Quaker, raised on pacifist teachings, she spends most of the film pleading with Will to walk away, to leave Hadleyville and start their life elsewhere. Her entire identity is built around refusing violence. And yet in the climax, Amy pulls the trigger, shooting one of Frank Miller's men in the back. For 1952 audiences, this was shocking. A woman of faith, a pacifist, breaking her deepest conviction in cold blood. Grace Kelly herself admitted years later that she wrestled with the scene, wondering whether it betrayed the character or revealed her hidden strength. Director Fred Zinnemann saw it differently. He argued that Amy's decision wasn't about hypocrisy, it was about love. In that moment, she chooses her husband over her creed, life over doctrine. What makes this fact even stranger is how the camera frames her act. Amy doesn't shoot boldly. She flinches, almost recoils, as if horrified by herself. The shot is messy, awkward, and yet it changes everything. Her pacifism, shattered in a single gunshot, turned Amy into one of the most complex heroines of her era. Not a saint, not just a victim, but a woman forced into moral compromise. A weird detail for the 1950s, a pacifist Quaker who saved the hero by breaking her own vow. The Mexican character who redefined the Western woman. In the landscape of 1950s Westerns, women were usually written as fragile brides or barroom temptresses, but High Noon introduced someone different, Helen Ramirez, played by Mexican actress Katy Jurado. Helen was unlike any woman audiences had seen in the genre. She was worldly, independent, and morally ambiguous. She had been Frank Miller's lover, then Will Kane's, and now was linked to Harvey Pell. In another film, that backstory would reduce her to a scandal. But here's the twist. Zinnemann and Jurado portrayed her with dignity and strength. Critics at the time didn't quite know what to make of her. She was neither the fallen woman stereotype nor the angelic bride. Instead, she was practical, shrewd, and unwilling to play the town's cowardly games. In fact, Helen is the only character who openly tells Amy the truth about her situation. Men like Kane cannot simply walk away from their fate. Jurado herself later reflected that Helen's strength came from survival, the ability to endure judgment and still hold her head high. This role was groundbreaking, one of the first major portrayals of a Latina actress in Hollywood that wasn't played for stereotype. The weird fact is that while Kane was the film's moral center, Helen Ramirez was its conscience, a role audiences weren't ready for but couldn't forget. The Judge Who Ran Away in Real Life. 2. One of the strangest scenes in High Noon comes when Kane seeks support from Judge Metrick, from the very man who had sentenced Frank Miller to hang years earlier. Instead of offering help, the judge quietly packs up his law books, climbs into a buggy, and leaves town. His words sting. "This is the end of this town, Marshal. Best to get out while you still can." What most viewers don't know is how eerily that mirrored real life. The actor, Otto Kruger, was himself dealing with fading influence in Hollywood. Once a prominent leading man in the 1930s, by the 1950s his career was dwindling. Just as the judge abandoned Hadleyville, Kruger was watching Hollywood slowly abandon him. Film historians note that Kruger poured his own bitterness into the role, delivering lines with weary cynicism that went beyond the script. His judge isn't just cowardly, he's disillusioned. A man who knows the law means nothing when fear rules the streets. This moment, the authority figure fleeing instead of fighting, was another deliberate slap in the face to traditional Westerns. Usually the judge is the voice of justice. Here he's just another deserter. On screen he abandoned the marshal. Off-screen, Kruger's career was slipping away just as quietly. Life imitated art in one of the strangest parallels in the film. The prop badge drop that wasn't in the script. The most unforgettable image in High Noon comes at the very end. Frank Miller lies dead, Amy clings to Will, and the town finally dares to step outside. In silence, Kane pulls the tin star from his chest, stares at it, and throws it into the dust. The camera lingers on the badge as he and Amy ride away. Audiences assumed this was scripted, a carefully planned symbolic finale. But here's the twist. It wasn't in the original script. Gary Cooper and Fred Zinnemann discussed how to end the story in the days leading up to the final shoot. Cooper, drained from the emotional weight of the film and his own health struggles, suggested that Kane shouldn't walk away triumphantly. He should leave the badge behind, a bitter gesture to a town that betrayed him. Zinnemann agreed, and the two improvised the motion during filming. That single choice changed the meaning of the entire film. Instead of victory, the ending became disillusionment. Kane didn't just defeat Miller, he renounced Hadleyville and everything it stood for. It's one of cinema's great ironies. The most iconic moment of High Noon was born not from a script, but from an actor's instinct. Cooper's weary hand, discarding duty like a broken promise, made history. The nose job that changed casting forever. Lee Van Cleef's hawk-like features made him unforgettable, but in 1951 the studio executives saw a problem. They thought his nose was too crooked. too harsh, too villainous. Their solution? He undergoes plastic surgery before being cast as Harvey Pell, Kane's deputy. Van Cleef refused. His face was his face, and he wouldn't let Hollywood carve it down. The result? He lost the deputy role to Lloyd Bridges, and instead was reassigned to the silent part of Colby, one of Miller's gunmen. Here's the weird irony, that so-called demotion launched his career. Colby has no dialogue, yet Van Cleef's menacing glare was unforgettable. It caught the attention of casting directors, and a decade later, Sergio Leone would build his spaghetti westerns on Van Cleef's unforgettable silhouette. Imagine if he had caved, had his nose fixed, and played the deputy instead. He might have vanished into Hollywood's sea of handsome, forgettable faces. By refusing to change, Van Cleef preserved the very uniqueness that made him iconic. So in a strange way, a rejected nose job gave the world one of Western cinema's most legendary villains. The community that walked away, on and off screen. Perhaps the weirdest fact about High Noon is how closely the story of Hadleyville reflected real Hollywood at the time. On screen, Kane begs for help, only to be abandoned by neighbors, friends, even his own deputy. Off-screen, screenwriter Carl Foreman begged his peers for support as the House Un-American Activities Committee hunted him. Most turned their backs. Careers were at stake, reputations fragile. Just like the townspeople who told Kane, "This is not our fight," many in Hollywood told Foreman they couldn't risk being seen by his side. Fred Zinnemann later admitted this eerie parallel was unintentional yet uncanny. Watching the dailies, even the actors could feel the subtext. The town represented the real industry, choosing self-preservation over principle. The symbolism struck deep. John Wayne hated it, calling the film un-American. But to others, the cowardice of Hadleyville became the very point. Evil isn't always unstoppable because it's strong. Sometimes it wins because good people step aside. This blending of fiction and reality gave High Noon a resonance that went far beyond its Western trappings. It wasn't just about Will Kane's lonely fight. It was about Carl Foreman, Hollywood, and the chilling silence of those who chose to walk away. The secret response film, Rio Bravo. Sometimes the legacy of a movie isn't just what it creates, but what it provokes. High Noon so enraged John Wayne that he helped build a direct rebuttal. Howard Hawks' 1959 Western Rio Bravo. Wayne detested how High Noon showed townspeople cowering and abandoning their marshal. To him, it was cowardice dressed as drama. So in Rio Bravo, he flipped the script. His sheriff doesn't beg for help, doesn't knock on doors, doesn't get abandoned. Instead, he gathers a small, loyal band, a drunk, a young gunslinger, a crippled old man, and faces the enemy with collective strength. Howard Hawks admitted in interviews that Rio Bravo was made as a conscious reaction to High Noon. Where Zinnemann's film was tense, moral, and political, Rio Bravo was leisurely, action-driven, and definitely apolitical. The weird fact? Without High Noon, Rio Bravo might never have existed. The two films became opposite poles in the Western genre, one about isolation and betrayal, the other about camaraderie and resilience. Audiences have debated for decades which is superior, but the truth is, they're forever bound together. One film's defiance birthed another's answer. The classic that outlived its critics. When High Noon premiered in 1952, not everyone hailed it as a masterpiece. Some critics thought it was too slow, too talky, even un-American. John Wayne dismissed it, Howard Hawks mocked it, and studio executives doubted it would make money. Yet time proved them all wrong. The film won 4 Academy Awards: Best Actor, Gary Cooper, Best Editing, Best Score, and Best Song. It earned 7 nominations in total and became a staple of film schools worldwide. More importantly, its shadow stretched far beyond Hollywood. President Dwight Eisenhower screened it at the White House. Years later, President Bill Clinton called it his favorite film and showed it to staffers, saying Kane's lonely stand mirrored the moral courage required of leaders. In 1989, High Noon was one of the first 25 films chosen by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry, declared culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The strangest twist of all? A film born in controversy, nearly strangled by politics, mocked by its own genre icons, went on to outlive them all. The clocks that tick too fast on screen have now ticked for 70 years, and High Noon still rings louder than ever. High Noon was never just another Western. It was a puzzle of contradictions, real time that wasn't real, bravery laced with cowardice, politics hidden inside gunfights, accidents that became art. Every corner of its production tells a story stranger than fiction. A train nearly derailing, a song hijacking the soundtrack, an actor's weary face turning into myth, Gary Cooper's pain, Grace Kelly's doubts, Lee Van Cleef's silent defiance, all of it became part of a larger truth, that cinema's greatest moments often come from imperfection, compromise, and chance. On screen, Will Kane stood alone at noon, abandoned by his town. Off-screen, Carl Foreman stood alone before HUAC, abandoned by Hollywood. Both men faced betrayal, both pressed forward, and both left us a legacy. 70 years later, High Noon still feels urgent because it forces us to ask, what do we do when the clock is ticking, when the train is coming, when no one stands beside us? Do we run or do we face the street? If you found these 20 weird facts eye-opening, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, which revelation surprised you most? Was it the train accident, the badge improvisation, the nose job demand, or the song that wouldn't quit? Because in the end, High Noon isn't just about the West, it's about us, about courage when the world turns away, and about the strange, fragile ways that movies become immortal.